With the weather finally cooperating this spring, it is high time I started in with training on some of the horses.
Girl?
Scarlet has pretty much just been hanging out
Okay.
all winter. I haven't even had her in this small arena yet before. She is at the point in her training where I need to start exposing her to different things. Scarlet already knows how to lunge, so this should be a good way to test out what she remembers. Although she hasn't had very many training days over the winter, I have been handling her regularly. She gets brought into the barn and gets to stay in a stall when the weather is really nasty out. I knew she was going to have a little bit of trouble with the extra open space that is in this arena. You could see right there that she did try and jump into my arms a little bit. Compared to last year around this time when I was just getting her halter broke, Scarlet has grown a ton. I haven't measured her in quite a while, but I think she is around 14 2 hands now. She is probably exactly the same size as Frisco Bill. When I got her from the auction, she was only a few months old and she hasn't even turned 2 yet this year. She did have a relatively rough start to the first couple months of her life, but it has been nice to be able to provide her with the best of everything since I've had her, so she is growing up into a very strong, pretty horse. She is a little bit excitable being in this new space, so I'm doing a few things to try and get her to calm down. I ask her to lower her head and get her some scratches. Once she starts feeling a little bit more comfortable, she starts playing around a little bit. This kind of behavior is actually something that I was expecting from her. She hasn't been worked all summer and this is a very new environment for her. Young horses, especially wild ones like Scarlet, do sometimes have a problem with bigger open spaces. It takes them a lot longer than a domestic horse usually to calm down and feel at ease in the extra space. She is pulling towards the gate, which is where I have the camera set up. This really isn't a big deal. I'm just going to work her through these little rough patches and she should get better by the end of our session today. I have actually not even taught Scarlet how to tie yet, so while I'm kind of figuring out where she's at her first session back, I am also planning to get her started on tying very soon. I like to make sure all my horses have adequate tools so they're successful when I start tying them, and Scarlet does give to pressure very well. You can see the few times when she is pulling away from me while she's lunging, she does come back to me pretty easily. For you guys that have seen Studman's video, you may recognize that Scarlet doesn't try and rip the lead rope out of my hand like Studman when he's scared. She just gets a little bit excitable and hits the end of the rope and then is pretty easily contained after that. So in that regard, she is a little bit further along in her basic training than Studman, even though there is a pretty significant age difference. This type of playful behavior from Scarlet is not something I'm going to reprimand her for. She is still learning all of this stuff, so it wouldn't do me any good to get after her while she's playing around and figuring it out. I do think that that is a big mistake that people make when they're working with young horses. The expectations for perfection in a young horse like Scarlet are pretty unrealistic. Even if Scarlet were a domestic horse, I would let her play around on the lunge line and figure all this stuff out. She is about right on the edge of where I would like them to be. If she got any worse, I would take her back into the round pen so she has a physical barrier keeping her from kind of pulling away. But as you can see, as we go through our session today, she is calming down and figuring out the boundaries that I've set for her. I also don't have my stick and string with me today. I didn't feel like she needed it. She understands all the cues and we're having just a real easy day. I'm not going to put too much pressure on her very first day back into work this year. Altogether, I ended up lunging her for 15 minutes. When she started to relax and become more comfortable with what we were doing was when I decided to enter session. I really like my horses to keep a calm mind while I'm working them. I don't like them to get too excitable. Even though I'm done with our lunging for today, after that I am going to work on a few things with Scarlet's face. She has only been halter broke for about a year, which a lot of people might think is a very long time. However, Scarlet has had some pretty big hurdles that she has had to get past.
Hey.
I'm going to start by doing something that she knows very well, which is how to pick up her feet. She is due for a trim next week, so I think I'm going to start teaching her how to use the stand. I think I've got her nutrition program really dialed in. If anything, she's getting a little bit too fat. I have had a lot of comments about Scarlet wearing a halter for a lot of the time when she's turned out. If you've seen her original video, you know that she did have some problems with her face when I got her. The most likely thing that happened to her was some injury while she was getting gathered. It really could have happened any time between when she was wild and when she went through the sale. Since she doesn't have her winter coat, you can see the scar on the bridge of her nose right there. She also has another scar that you can't really see from where she was draining some pus when I got her. I think this is why she's been having so much trouble letting me handle her face. She does wear the pink collar all the time. It does have a release on it that's just a little zip tie, so if she ever got hung up on it, it would release on its own. Due to the fact that she was jumping out of her pen when I first got her, she needs to have some type of identification on her just in case she gets away. When I catch her, I do switch out her halter pretty frequently, but she still does have a lot of trouble with me initially putting it on. We've been doing this whole song and dance all winter long pretty much. I think she now holds the record for the longest it's ever taken me to actually really halter break a horse. Goose did take a very long time initially, but once he finally started wearing a halter, he was fine with me putting it on and taking it off of him. I was really excited that she let me do this today. For the last year, I have not been able to touch the top of her head or like between her eyes or on her nasal bone right here where she has her big scar. So even though it doesn't seem like much, this is a huge step for this little girl. She is extremely protective of her head and her ears. While I don't use treats on all of my training horses, one like Scarlet who has a lot of trouble accepting touch on her face, this has been a really good way to entice her to stand still for me. When she does accept me rubbing on her face, I do deposit a little treat into her mouth.
Good girl.
It is a little bit wild that I've been trying to do this for almost exactly a year, and today she just decided that it would be okay. All of the very low key, easy, repetitive training that I've done on her has finally started to pay off.
There we go.
One of the reasons that I very first decided to put this little girl's story on YouTube is because I knew she would be probably one of the most difficult horses that I've ever trained. I have trained a lot of BLM Mustangs and a few other reservation horses, but Scarlet does have a surprisingly reactive nature just in general.
That's a good girl.
She does still react to things that she doesn't like. Her muzzle is still very sensitive.
Good girl.
I've basically just been target training with my hand on her face for the last couple months. It is a pretty simple concept. I just offer out my hand to her, and when she touches it, I go ahead and give her a few scratches. This gives her a tiny bit of control over the whole situation. If she's having a bad day and she doesn't want to be curious and investigate me, then I know I probably won't get any headway. Today she is being very curious. I actually ran out of treats in my pocket. Even though I'm not going to ride this girl when she turns 2, there's no reason why she can't start with her under saddle preparations. Overall, she has moved along nice and steady in her training, and it would be great if I could get her wearing a saddle and learning to build her muscles and use her body correctly before I crawl on her. When I was done doing a little bit of training on handling her head, I did let her sniff around this pen for a little bit on her own. Most of the horses I have do not get brushed every day. Her shine and the glisten on her coat is just from her nutrition. I did not brush her today. I just pulled her right out of her turnout and brought her in to do work. I am planning on doing a video on my basic feeding program for these horses. I just haven't really made the time yet. With the weather getting nicer, I'm having a little bit of trouble juggling making videos and actually getting out and doing some work with the horses. Probably in the next week, I'll start tying Scarlet out, and I will be doing a video on that. I would love to turn her out in this smaller arena, but the fence is just not strong enough for me to feel comfortable with that at this point. I do have all the panels to enclose Whiplash and Goose's dry lot for her to go out in. I don't typically ride the colts in the round pen.
Tiny.
But it will be nice to give her the opportunity to get out in a different enclosure and start to teach her about real fencing. Before I put her away for the day, I did let her have a few minutes of fresh grass. I really do like all of the horses to get out on grass when it's available. There are a few horses that I have that I need to be extremely careful about the amount of grass that they're on. Nigel, Studman, and Goose, as well as Big Gus, do have some sensitivities to the sugar in the grass. We do have a few more rainy days to go before I do introduce everybody to grass for the year. That is always an exciting time, and I think the horses are definitely ready for it. While Scarlet is grazing, I do a few little things that I know might be a little scary for her.
You're all right.
She needs to learn about the world around her with no boundaries keeping her in. She does startle quite easily still, but now she's able to regulate herself to where she's not wanting to run away from everything, which is a big step for a wild horse. Compared to how she was when I first got her, she is doing so much better. One thing that I've been keeping a very close eye on her as well is the scar from where she had an abscess on her fetlock. I think that was from trauma as well when she was gathered, but it is a potential source of future lameness for her, so I am going to keep a very close eye on it. She has never been lame on it, but I probably will go ahead and get it x-rayed before I ever start riding her. Before I take her back in her pen, I decide to take her across the bridge a time or two. She has seen this before and been across it, but she's a little bit wiggly the first time over it this year. I go ahead and let her go over it the short way first. There are gophers that like to hide under there, so it's a little bit more hollow sounding than the last time she was on it. Huckleberry's been trying to dig them out this year. This is a really good way to get them used to trailer loading. The hollow sound really mimics the same thing she'll encounter when she steps on the trailer. With her done for the day, I've got a few more chores to do this evening before I feed everybody their dinner. It is definitely starting to green up everywhere, even though there's still a bunch of snow on the tippy tops of the mountains. Today is a particularly nice day. I have been setting up a lot of the temporary fence that I've been using to turn out all the horses initially. We had an insane windstorm the other day and a lot of the fencing did get blown down, so I'll have to just redo it. I've also noticed there has been an explosion of baby gophers out recently. I haven't been bringing Huckleberry because it's not exactly fair to these little guys. They haven't quite figured out about the whole predator thing yet, so while they're still tiny babies, Huckleberry is going to stay at home. I do not poison these guys or anything, but once they get bigger, they will be fair game for Huckleberry and Tiny. I have filled in a lot of the holes out in the main pasture, so they've been popping up with little entrances to their burrows in the areas that the horses do not get turned out in. There are a few new little holes that have popped up in this little grass area. These babies look like they're only a week or two old. Huckleberry would definitely snatch those guys up in 2 seconds. In addition to a lot of baby gophers popping up, there are some weeds that are beginning to show. There's only a few patches that pop up in the pasture, so usually I'm able to pull them out before they become a real problem. Poor Stewie and little Gus really think that I'm going to let them out on the pasture today. I think it's really hard for these horses when the grass starts coming up to keep their composure and wait long enough for me to get all of the fields ready.
Oh, Gus.
Little Gus does get a little cranky and aggressive when I don't turn him out on the pasture right away in the spring. I have noticed that Stewie has been getting a little bit on his nerves, and a lot of times I see him separate from the other boys. I'm beginning to think that maybe Ziggy would like to go out with these boys in the summertime. Ziggy is one that I'm going to have to keep an eye on how he processes the pasture in the spring. His glucose was on the high side when we ran his blood work, so it's something that's in the back of my mind as I'm planning where all the horses are going to go. It looks like Tiny is on the prowl for some baby gophers this evening. She doesn't try too hard to catch anything when Huckleberry's not around, so she's probably just getting the lay of the land and seeing how all the new gopher holes are shaping up. She does have to be careful during the day because in addition to coyotes that are out right now, there are also a lot of birds of prey that like to come and snatch up the baby gophers. I have noticed on the little cameras that I have out that Tiny really doesn't stray too far from the barn during the day unless I'm there. She can hide in this really tall grass, but we do have bald eagles and hawks around, so they probably wouldn't pass up the opportunity to snatch her if they could. All of the boys are being very well behaved so close to dinner time. Really, the only horse that has been introduced to the grass already is Frisco Bill. He basically gets to do whatever he wants around here, and with him not really doing as well on his senior feed as I had hoped, I wanted to get him out on the grass as soon as possible. He has never been very sensitive to the grass, so he was introduced slowly, and now he's on about a half an hour of grass in the morning and then a half an hour at night before everyone else gets fed. I don't know if it's the nice weather we're having or if it's because I'm finally getting caught up with all of the chores that I have to do from winter and early spring. But I'm finally feeling satisfied with where I'm at and can start in on some of the training on these horses. I have set a goal for myself to hit 100,000 subs by Scarlet's birthday, which is July 1st. So if you guys enjoy my channel and you're not subscribed yet, think about doing that to help me with my goal. Thank you so much for watching and stay tuned for the next video.